Call Denise Roach.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Tēnā koe ki te whare. Rau rangatira mā tēnei te mihi ki a koutou I runga I te kaupapa o te rā. Tēnā koutou ngā rangatira o Ngati Makino. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's my privilege to rise to take this call for the Greens. We will be supporting this bill, and I must first state that while this bill is a settlement for Ngati Makino, we maintain that it is a deal, the best deal that can be had at this time, no doubt, but in no way does it compensate for the total loss and the total injustices that Ngati Makino has endured since the 1840s. In the 1860s, Ngati Makino were drawn into war and suffered losses of their people in the Battle of Te Ranga. In 1866, they suffered land confiscation, which affected all Ngati Makino, not just those few who'd taken part in the conflict. Ngati Makino lost 82,000 hectares of land, and by 1900 had only 3.6% of their original land holdings at Waitahanui, Tahungaroa and Whakarewa left. In the first few decades of the 1900s, Ngati Makino faced further land losses, the Crown deliberately alienating Ngati Makino from the land through various pieces of legislation, or as the Crown compulsory acquired additional land for scenic reserves and the like. By 1992, Ngati Makino retained only 0.6% of the Waitahanui, Tahungaroa and Whakarewa blocks. In Part 6, subsection 11 of the settlement bill, the Crown acknowledges its culpability and also acknowledges that, and I quote, the lands formerly in Ngati Makino's possession have contributed to the wealth and development of New Zealand, while Ngati Makino have been deprived of the benefits of that land. It's fantastic that these claims are finally being addressed. We acknowledge the long process that the people of Ngati Makino have undertaken to finally get redress. The first treaty claim was lodged 20 years ago, the deed of settlement initialled in 2008 and finally signed in April 2011. We acknowledge that in common with other treaty settlements, there have been concerns about cross-claims because iwi and hapu don't live inside a jam jar. Ancestors are shared and land and awa are sacred to many, and that can be fraught with difficulties when it comes to negotiating a settlement. So we acknowledge those other hapu and iwi who have those ties. In Part 6 of the settlement bill, the government also acknowledges the many times the Crown and its government agencies breached the Treaty of Waitangi. Make no mistake, this bill as a settlement is an indication of the generosity of Ngati Makino. The redress that is contained in this bill does not in any way compensate for the losses that they suffered. Those losses include the loss of land, the loss of their economic opportunity, of mana, of their right to rangatiratanga, of their guardianship of their land and waters. And there is no way to compensate for the personal losses and the losses of well-being that generations have endured. This settlement bill is a sign of goodwill. The settlement signals an undertaking by Ngati Makino that they are willing to continue to build a relationship with the Crown, and I acknowledge the Minister for his work in this area, that they are prepared to maintain their side of the agreement that is the Treaty of Waitangi. The restoration of some land and some compensation is often misunderstood by the wider public, and as an MP, it's been a huge privilege to stand here in this House and learn about and speak about this settlement. But there are others who don't have a clear idea of history of our country, let alone the injustices that have occurred to so many iwi and hapu across Aotearoa, New Zealand. Some of those people simply don't understand that all New Zealanders gain from these treaty settlements. Yesterday at the Māori Affairs Select Committee, we heard from the Minister, Mr Finlayson, about the enormous economic benefits treaty settlements have contributed to whole regions. He noted in particular the settlements of the late 1990s and the economic powerhouses that both Tainui Waikato and Ngāi Tahu have become as a result of the settlements that they've received, and how that has benefited both Māori and Pākehā. They've used those settlements to develop their assets and to create jobs in their area. Ngati Makino can now look forward to building their own economic benefits within their rohe too. And there are those in New Zealand that don't recognise or understand what the Treaty of Waitangi is all about, who don't understand that the treaty is the foundation that gives us all the right to stand here in this place, in this country. That it gives rights to tauiwi as well as rights which have frequently been trampled on to iwi. And it's for this reason that I fear that while we settle some claims, there may well be more to come. At the first reading of this bill, which was joined with Ngāi Manahiri, with the Minister, Mr Finlayson, said that iwi can be very proud of what they've achieved. Through this legislation, a platform has been set for a new relationship between Ngāi Manahiri, Ngati Makino and the Crown, a relationship that I certainly hope will be based for the future on mutual trust, cooperation and a respect for the treaty. That was in February, but since then there's reason to suspect that there is still some members of this House, and the government even, who don't really have the same sense of respect for the treaty that Mr Finlayson espouses. And I think here particularly of water, which has been debated all this week in Lower Hutt in front of the Waitangi Tribunal, and I think too of the comments by the Prime Minister, Mr Key, about ignoring recommendations from the Waitangi Tribunal, which to me is another trampling on the rights of Māori. It worries me that the perception in the minds of many is about the ownership of water or whenua.
Order.
For Māori, the relationship with water and land is much more than simply ownership. We whakapapa to our land, we whakapapa to our whenua, as they say in Whanganui, ko au te awa, ko au te awa, ko au. I am the river is me. Our identity is in our land, it's in our maunga, it's in our water. For me as Ngati Raukawa, Ngati Huri, our river is the mighty Waikato. Ownership for Māori confers responsibility and guardianship, and this is being recognised to some extent with co-governance arrangements for the care and restoration of some rivers, and I think particularly of Ngati Maniapoto and the Waipa River and Tainui Waikato iwi with the Waikato River. But it's worth noting that Māori cannot be separated from our lands and our moana and our rivers, regardless of what the Crown says. The relationships and rights that iwi have with our land and with our waters, that whakapapa is inside us and it cannot ever be taken apart from us. And as evidence, I point to the decision by this government to remove Section 9 of the State-Owned Enterprises Act as part of the legislation for mixed ownership model, the law to enable the sale of our state-owned assets. By taking out the Treaty of Waitangi provisions, we may well see more claims coming from iwi as a result. But back to this bill, this settlement for Ngati Makino. It's worth noting the words that are outlined in Part 6, subsection 12 of the bill, which says, through these acts, the Crown, its ministers and government departments have dishonoured the Treaty of Waitangi, its principles and its spirit, denigrating te mana motahaki or Ngati Makino. In so doing, the Crown acknowledges that it has brought dishonour upon itself. It now falls time for these grievances to be lifted. It is the desire of the Crown to build a foundation of trust and commitment so that Ngati Makino and the Crown to revitalise te rangatiratanga o Ngati Makino. We acknowledge the many who have spent their lives working on this settlement and to those who have passed away during the journey to this moment. And finally, we commend this bill to the House. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
I call Louise upstairs.